What are dragons? This is a question that is integral to the inheritance cycle. What are they like? What makes them special? What is their biology? What is their history? Today, we answer all these questions and more on our newest episode of the Inheritance Cycle Analyzed, as we delve into the subject of dragons themselves in this 3-part video series covering one of the 5 dominant species of Alligasia. Hello everyone, this is Saberrex, and in this video we will be covering the characters, creatures, and plots of books and films such as the Primitive War franchise, the Inheritance Cycle, and so much more. So, without further ado, welcome, one and all. So, to start off, dragons are gigantic flying reptiles native to the land of Alligasia. They have no understood beginning and no foreseeable end, for they suffer and thrive as the land of their birth does. From this, we can understand that they have been around for thousands, if not millions of years. They are highly intelligent, sentient, and self-aware. They have some form of society, though how their society works is not entirely clear. It must be said, at their heart, they still remain in many ways as feral and ferocious as any animal, for they prefer to hunt and live out under open sky and hold territories of their own accord. They and the dwarves, along with a few other creatures, are the original native inhabitants of Alligasia. Anatomy-wise, most dragons are hexapods. That is to say, they have 6 limbs. 4 legs for walking, with 2 wings for flying. There are some exceptions to this rule, which we will cover later, but this is the body plan of most dragons in the land of Alligasia. They are covered in large, sharp scales across their body, with the exception of their unarmored armpits. Their tails are long and thick, used both for combat as well as for steering when flying. They have huge horns atop their heads, the number and shape of which apparently vary from individual to individual. The same is true for the colors of their scales, and indeed, a group of them, known as a thunder, would resemble nothing less than a living rainbow. Sharp spikes ran atop the spines of dragons in a singular row down their necks and backs all the way to the end of their tail, and many had large arrays of spikes along their tails similar to the thagomizer seen in dinosaurs like Stegosaurus. Dragons could also grow to very large sizes. Even the smallest ones had wingspans of about 100 feet. The largest could be mistaken for small hills or even a mountain in the very largest individuals. Biologically, dragons were effectively immortal in regards to their lifespan. Nothing aside from a physical weapon, magic, disease, or poison could kill them, and their weaknesses tended to decrease with age. As a result of this, they laid small clutches of eggs. Their large brains allowed them to communicate telepathically both with each other and with other sentient beings. Wild dragons preferred to communicate by way of mental images, impressions, smells, and other sensations. True language in dragons would be something achieved later through events we will discuss. Dragons grow and mature very quickly, with a hatchling just having emerged from its egg doubling in size within a couple of weeks when properly fed. Within at least a month, a young dragon was at least the size of a horse. A baby dragon was capable of hunting its own food, so it did not require its parents to care for it in the same way most birds or mammals do. A dragon would reach sexual maturity at the age of 6 months old, which was also about the same time they could start breathing fire. Dragons never stopped growing, and though their growth would slow down at a certain age, it would never stop completely, even up to the time they died. Outwardly, it should also be noted that it was impossible for a casual observer to tell whether a dragon was male or female just by looking at them. Upon reaching a certain size and age, generally when they had grown so large that there was almost no threat that could overcome them, and the demands of eating required huge amounts of food to sustain them, the oldest dragons often spent much of their time in a trance-like state akin to dreaming, as a way of conserving their energy, pondering whatever thoughts passed their fancy, whether it was the subtle wing beats of a butterfly or the more complex workings of the world around them. Interestingly, when a dragon egg was laid, the infant inside it was already able to hatch instantaneously from its egg upon it being laid, but would normally wait for the right conditions in order to emerge, usually when there was an abundance of food and sufficient safety. A dragon hatchling could wait for many centuries inside an egg for these conditions, while remaining unharmed due to the strong magic within them. Dragon eggs tended to vary quite dramatically in size, with larger eggs laid by larger mothers. Some of these eggs could be as tall as an average human, depending on the size of the mother that laid them. However, it must also be noted that waiting for more than a century or two inside an egg was not optimal for a hatchling, as their minds would grow twisted and strange if left in the egg too long. All dragons possessed the same tools which they used for hunting. They had razor-sharp serrated teeth set in powerful jaws. Likewise, their front and back feet were armed with sharp talons. They were maneuverable and fast in the air, and they had bat-like wings with the jointed fingers of said wings supporting a strong membrane of veined skin that allowed them to be more agile than their size would suggest. When it came to eating, dragons generally had a very efficient metabolism, requiring food generally about once a week. The larger the dragon, the more food it generally needed, but this also allowed the dragon to go longer periods without food once it was fully satiated, much like with crocodiles. Dragons were largely carnivores, but they would not hesitate to eat certain plants, with some, such as fireweed, being very good for their digestion and to settle their stomachs. There was almost nothing in regards to meat that a dragon would pass up, and though they generally avoided eating other sentient species, some individuals, particularly the more depraved and dangerous ones, were not hesitant about eating other animals that could speak and reason. One of the other formidable tools in their arsenal was their intelligence. Because dragons were sentient, they could use their minds to formulate complex plans, but they could also even use them to incapacitate prey by means of a telepathic attack. Another tool in a dragon's arsenal was magic, but this came with caveats. A dragon could not use most of their magic at will, and could only use it when they had the inspiration to do so. When such a thing happened, the magic of a dragon was capable of doing incredible things, some of which defied the conventional laws and limitations of magic in general. Because they were creatures of the strongest magic, despite their inability to use most of it, the world reacted to dragons in strange and wondrous ways, sometimes in ways that could never be explained with words. The only magic that a dragon could use at will was breathing fire, which they became able to do at the age of 6 months. Dragons could, depending on size, age, skill, and training, learn to breathe fire for at least half an hour. While dragons had all the same organs that most other animals possessed, they had one additional feature that made them particularly unique. This is the Eldunari, or Heart of Hearts, a gem-like organ that dragons could use to transfer their consciousness into. Despite being technically immortal, the physical demands of life would eventually kill a dragon's body. However, If a dragon chose to, it could transfer its consciousness into its Eldunari. If it did not, this organ would also disintegrate with the dragon's body when it died and decayed. The size of the Eldunari varied with the dragon's age, along with the time at which the dragon was able to disgorge the organ from its body, which it would do so by way of regurgitation. Generally, most dragons who did disgorge their Eldunari were ancient and very powerful. Occasionally, though, younger dragons would disgorge the organ prematurely, and their mental state would not mature beyond the time they disgorged their Eldunari. Whatever energy was inside the Eldunari when the dragon died or disgorged it would remain, and the organ would become saturated with extra energy for the next 5 to 7 years until it was full. The larger an Eldunari, the more energy it could store. Eldunari were what technically made dragons truly immortal, and unless the gem was broken, they would endure for all time unless they found some inspiration to break their Eldunari from within using magic. Because Eldunari housed a dragon's consciousness, a dragon that had disgorged this organ and could still use its teeth and claws could be communicated with over vast distances, even if it wasn't present. Eldunari that remained close together could also communicate directly with one another. They could also lend their energy to other creatures if they were in contact or close by, likewise increasing their intelligence due to the dragon's knowledge. As we will discuss when it comes to the subject of dragons that bonded with riders, this was particularly important to their order, and dragons that bonded with a rider would often smash their Eldunari if their riders died. If the body of a dragon died and the Eldunari lived on, the resulting pairing would become known as Indolvarn, and while potentially traumatic, such pairings of dragon and rider alike adjusted well to the change, and were still able to serve their order with distinction. We will discuss more of this in later videos regarding the order itself. Before the dragon riders were formed, all Eldunari were kept in the mountains at the center of the Haderach Desert, known as Dewfell's Nangoroth. They would all be moved to the vaults created on Vroengard in the city of Doru Areba to ensure their safety, because Eldunari were the most sacred and well-kept secret of the dragons. In regards to their history, the origin of dragons is unknown. However, it is hinted at in the book Murtagh that one of the largest and earliest dragons may have been Ajla-Gur, whom, if he is a dragon, is one of, if not the largest dragon of all time. It should also be noted that he may be one of the few, if not the only dragon with no wings. Whether this is due to his gigantic size or if he is a more ancient type of dragon is not yet known as of the creation of this video and the current number of books published regarding Alagasia. Nonetheless, the origins of dragons are largely shrouded in mystery. What is known is that many of them lived in the Haderach Desert, not to mention across the entirety of Alagasia. They also apparently lived elsewhere across the world, but they may have died out there, but it cannot be said for certain yet. The Inheritance Cycle Almanac implies as much. They were known to engage in wars with the dwarves, in which the dragons would steal sheep, Feldenost, and other livestock, as well as taking their gold and jewels. The dragons were too powerful to overcome, and the dwarves were too good at hiding in mountain strongholds to be eradicated. This would all change with the arrival of the elves from the land of Alalea. When elves first encountered dragons, the two races largely ignored each other at first, but the elves arrogantly thought the dragons were simply animals. From this, a grave mistake arose. An elven youth and his friends attacked and killed a dragon like they would hunt wild game such as deer. The dragons in turn butchered the elves and attacked the race in vengeance. This was the start of Dufern Skullblaka, the war between the elves and dragons. The elves soon fought back, defensively at first, but soon attacked for their own safety because of how ferocious the dragons were. The elves tried many times to stop the violence, but weren't able to communicate with the dragons to find a peaceful solution. The war would last for 5 years. Among other events, the assault of the dragon nesting eyrie known as the Stone of Broken Eggs occurred in Duweldenvarden. In this assault, the elves attacked the dragons at night as they slept, killing adults, hatchlings, and shattering eggs alike. Blood rained down into the forest below, and the area was abandoned by the dragons forever after. If this wasn't enough, the elves made the 12 Dauthdertia, or Death Spears, 12 spears designed to kill dragons, all named after flowers, as ugly a mismatch as there could ever be. These weapons were unique in that they could counter any magic the dragons could utilize. Whenever they were used, blood rained from the skies, and eventually, all but one, Nirnen, were lost or destroyed over the millennia. The fighting would have continued for years longer until the dragons and elves had destroyed each other, but an act of fate intervened. This was the discovery of an abandoned dragon egg by an elf named Aragon, whose name would one day belong to another of equal importance. Aragon I saw benefits of raising a tamed dragon and took the egg home with him, naming him Bidwam. When Bidwam was old enough, Aragon took his new dragon friend with him to act as envoys for both sides so they could reach a peace agreement and end Dufernskoblaka. The pact that followed became one of the greatest pieces of magic ever made, for no signed treaty made of paper could end the war, and legal documents were worthless to a dragon. The spells to create the pact were complex and took 9 years to complete, whereupon the dragons and the elves, then led by Queen Tarmanora, created the spell that bound the elves and dragons together forever. This spell, created by the elves and given the necessary energy by the dragons, created the changes that would enhance them both. The elves became immortal, with their speed and grace enhanced, and the dragons were given the ability to use true language. Riders were also marked on their hand with a shining area of skin known as the Gedway Ignasia whenever they bonded to a dragon. To ensure the peace between the two races, the Dragon Riders were thus formed. With Aragon and Bidwam to lead them, the Order would rise to become the protectors of Alagasia, eventually going on to serve no king, no queen, and serving as equivalent authority to all rulers in the world. The Dragon Riders also became warriors, scholars, diplomats, healers, historians, and researchers, learning everything there was to know about the world around them as well as its peoples. They became friends with the dwarves, who, out of pride and stubbornness over past wrongs by the dragons, did not join in the pact with the elves and dragons, as mentioned. Dragons even gained such a vaunted status as a result of the pact that the elves held them in highest regard, allowing them to say and do whatever they wished without the etiquette that elves created for themselves. The riders and their dragons would eventually become instrumental in multiple events of the times to follow. These included the Palancar Crisis and the Razak War. In the first event, the arrival of humans led by King Palancar, who would essentially found the Brodring Kingdom, was driven out of his homeland by war and famine, and perhaps also another creature that would invade shortly afterwards, the Leatherblacka and their offspring, the Razak. Palancar tried making landfall but was blown off course and ended up making landfall further north, where he would encounter the elves and the riders after helping his people settle into a few other areas. To simplify complex events, the paranoid king tried to conquer the elves when he began to succumb to what was apparently dementia, but was repelled 3 times as a result of the dragon riders and the might of the elven military, prompting his aristocrats to betray him in exchange for peace. However, it should be noted that Palancar nor his family ever left the valley in which they initially settled after they were all banished and deposed, and that the former king was eventually murdered by one of his sons. His whole bloodline would end up riddled with treachery, corruption, and murder, but ultimately their descendants lived on in the peoples of the villages of Carvajal and Therinsford. To prevent anything like Palancar's attacks from ever happening again, humans were also included in the pact to become dragon riders. The Razak War was a much longer conflict, and as much a well-justified genocide as it was a military campaign. The Leatherblacka and the Razak were sentient predators that fed on humans, as well as any other creature besides, with the adults, the Leatherblacka, being as intelligent as any dragon. Because of the threat they posed as both an invasive species not native to Alagasia, not to mention the fact that they actively preyed on humans as part of their diet, the Leatherblacka and Razak were exterminated as leaf blight would be by gardeners. Only 2 Leatherblacka would escape, a mated pair, eventually nesting in Helgrind, the mountain near the city of Drasleona. The creatures were difficult to eradicate even up to that point, as they could not be tracked or sensed with magic. For more than 2,600 years, the Dragon Riders stood vigil over Alagasia. Over this time they built their own city, Doru Areba, on the island of Roengard, helped to make incredible advancements in research and magic, and served the people and dragons alike as their protectors. Rendered immortal unless blade, or poison, or disease took them, they safeguarded the dragon's greatest secrets and stood as powerful warriors. Many female dragons gave at least one of their eggs to bond to potential riders, generally 1 or 2 eggs gifted by the race as a whole every year, and special spells were spoken over the eggs given to the order to ensure that they did not hatch until the babies inside the eggs found a worthy match for them amongst a human or an elf. It should also be noted that the dragons that bonded to the riders during this time of peace and prosperity ended up becoming quite different from their wild kin. Their being granted language made them significantly different from their wild brethren, and while wild dragons could communicate just as effectively as those bonded to riders, they did so using impressions, memories, and sensations they had felt, such as taste, touch, smell, and feelings to communicate. Only the most cunning of the wild dragons chose to use the same type of telepathic communications that bonded dragons could use. The wild dragons were also very different in that they did as they pleased, went where they wanted, and answered to no one but themselves, though many did respect other beings as a result of learning to coexist with elves, humans, and dwarves. Interestingly enough, the wild female dragons in particular were said to be the fiercest members of their race, and amongst the male dragons bonded to riders, it was considered a great accomplishment to mate with one. Many famous dragons also existed both within and outside the order. These individual dragons we shall name in a later video, though we will show images of them here. What happened to Aragon I and Bidom is not known, but what is known is that they were succeeded by Vrail and his dragon Umaroth as the next leaders of the Dragon Riders, and that for 800 years from the time they had bonded to one another until their ends, Oramus and Glader served as part of the order, eventually reaching the rank of elder after serving actively for 100 years. The order's very success was largely due in part to the fact that dragons were so intelligent and powerful. A fully grown dragon had the wisdom to rival the wisest leaders, and many were large enough to fight an army. Were it not for the fact that dragons chose to bond with those they deemed worthy, the feats that the dragon riders accomplished would not have even been remotely possible. Unbeknownst to the dragon riders, however, after 2,600 years, change was coming. This change would prove to be some of the most disastrous in the history of the land and nearly mean the end for the entirety of dragonkind. In our next video, we will discuss the events that followed, the fall of the dragon riders. Tune in next time to learn more about what would become the darkest times in Allegasia and the history of dragons. Until then, if you enjoyed this video, please remember to like, comment, and subscribe for more content like this. Every bit of appreciation helps out this channel and allows it to grow and spread its content to more viewers like you. As always, thank you so very much for watching. I look forward to seeing you next time.